Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and tonight I'm joined by this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted, and who else would you be joining with? How are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm doing good. You sound like you're underwater again for some reason.
Yeah. Maybe I should just come closer to the computer. Is that better?
Yeah, maybe. Just you just scream into your computer. So tonight we're gonna
Ah,
be talking about some genre mashing.
yeah. So I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of a mixed reason why we're doing this, but there's nothing to say that you can't get some chocolate in your peanut butter or peanut butter in your chocolate and change up the way you're playing D&D.
I feel like all of my D&D recently, and matter of fact, just most of my games in general have been that been running anyway have been all genre mashing.
Well, I mean, to be fair, we have a long history of just playing some standard fantasy, and we didn't like the chocolate and the peanut butter, as the expression goes, for a long time. We didn't want to do anything that fell outside that spectrum. And then when we wound up stepping away from D&D, when we came back, that's pretty much affected the way we play D&D, and now it's predominantly, mixing a lot of stuff in. And that's, kind of the way we both have been doing it. But, like I would say all the games that you've run since we've, kind of come to 5e have had some kind of, mashing and bashing going on.
Well, I guess the very first 5e campaign was a little bit more on the vanilla side. Um,
But I mean, you brought Vargarians in. I mean, that's a bit of a space horror aspect. I mean, you didn't like not very high in the horror avenue, but
yeah.
when you put the concept of, hey, you go wrong, these things are going to Borgify you and completely take you over, and you will lose all sense of self. That falls into the horror genre, and that might not have started as what the campaign was about, but I think by the time we were like fifth or sixth level, like you were already starting to work that plot. And that was where the campaign ended. That's where we went to 20th level.
So I guess we should kind of talk about what we mean because Avram, genre like blending RPGs into D&D. So it's more like okay. So standard D&D is fantasy, right? Your standard fantasy trope. And kind of what we're talking about is mixing in some sci-fi or horror or eldritch horror, cosmic horror. There's all kinds of different horrors you can really mix into your D&D. We've thrown some post-apocalyptic stuff in with our D&D or with our fantasy. Um, so there's a lot of different things you can do. I mean, even D&D itself, right? Like over the course of the game has mixed various things in with in the very earliest you had Dark Sun, which was kind of post apocalyptic, wastelands, Mad Max ish in nature, very swords and sandals type of fantasy. Um, also you had Spelljammer, which is definitely leaning into sci-fi, or at least science fantasy aspects of things as well. And then you had Ravenloft, right? So they were
Mhm.
three mainstream settings where D&D said, okay, we're going to do something a little bit different here, and we're going to blend these other genres in with fantasy. Um, which oddly enough, like early on in our own gaming, we were always kind of hesitant to add you know straight from standard fantasy. Although we all really loved Dark Sun, um, even though we didn't play in that much, but we all like read the novels and stuff. We didn't really dabble in Spelljammer or Ravenloft as much. But again, like I read a lot of the Ravenloft novels, if not most of them. Um, so there's always been that, but it was at some point, right, in our gaming, for me personally, I won't speak for Ted here, he can speak for himself. But like I just got like after like 20 years of just playing, straight fantasy, I was like, all right, we need to shake this up. And the next thing you know, there was undead goblins in steam powered mechs running around. So I think that was the start of it for me.
Sure. And I can't, recall, specifically where, my genre mashing kind of came from. Because I mean, I feel my gaming career, like before you and I even started gaming together, I wasn't a, just D&D kind of person. I had played some Shadowrun and I had played some Star Wars, and it was pretty much whatever Vince was, you know, interested in running was, what I wound up, kind of getting into. Um, and then like once that kind of ramshackle group stopped getting together or, what have you, it was a scenario of, okay, well, the other guys just had the D&D book, so we just played D&D. And, that was fun and that was fine and what have you. Um, but it wasn't until, much later that we started looking at, other games. So I don't really know where exactly I started with any of that. But I mean, to this day, I look for inspiration from anywhere and everywhere to find new rule options and new themes and new ways to kind of bring in, something that I haven't done with D&D before.
Well, I mean, you do different stuff, but I still feel like a lot of your games are still kind of like standard fantasy. Like,
Sure.
in comparison, I've gone off the deep end, right? Like with
Sure. Yeah.
our current game Under the Dome is Arcana Punk and mixed with post-apocalyptic kind of setting, which is very different than a lot of the games we've run. Um, way back when on the channel, you could find I think I would say probably our very first foray as Nerdarchy into genre mashing was our Other Skies campaign, and that was because we were sponsored to run sessions of a very generic system, Open Legend, which you could kind of run anything with. And we decided, well, how about we just let our patrons vote on what type of game we're going to run, since we can kind of do anything. And like they came in like three things were like almost tie, and it was fantasy, steampunk, and eldritch horror. So we mixed them together to run Open Legend, which is not a D&D system, but it's kind of relevant because years later, I ended up putting that campaign together to run a D&D in a castle with D&D. So you got all those elements in there, with with D&D, and and it's a setting that we're probably going to revisit. Again, we've been thinking about we've created our own RPG system, and we've thought of ways to use the system that we've created alongside that campaign setting. So it wouldn't be D&D, but it's like, well, if we're going to go through all the work of creating the campaign setting, like we already understand the 5e rule set, so maybe we'll just do our own rules and 5e expansion for people that have their heart set on playing 5e.
Certainly, is a valid option. So I don't know what kind of direction you've got going for um, for thoughts on where we're talking today. But I kind of came up with a list of different genres, and I thought we might be able to kind of talk about how you might put this kind of genre or topic into your typical D&D game without really literally destroying it. I mean, some things like post-apocalyptic,
You
that
have to
kind of
destroy it.
needs destruction.
Yeah.
But a lot of the others, you can kind of still keep the bare bones of what the system or world is without, all right, set off the nukes.
So, what is your list? Where do you want to start? Since you've done the prep work, you've done the homework.
So I did not put these in any particular order, but the concept of mashup, the first thing that jumped into my head is one of my favorite TV shows, which is Firefly. So Western happened to be the first thing on my list. And when you start looking at the concept of Western, it's not really hard to take some of that into a D&D game. You know, to me, I look at the concept of Western is small towns, outlaws, uh, you know, standoff and duels, at high noon. All of these things can easily be done in D&D game, and heck, there are rules for pistols and that kind of stuff. So you could even bring all of that straight into the world that you're playing, or well, perhaps there's instead of pistols, like your duels are done with a particular sword or just whatever weapon you have, you know, so you can have these cool things. And heck, you could even come up with a duel system that you know um, kind of streamlines it to a handful of dice rolls rather than going into a full on combat where you've got to roll initiative and do round by round for each person. This could kind of give anybody a chance to beat the opponent without going through 20 minutes worth of combat.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because we absolutely did do a Western. Let's make fantasy D&D fantasy Western mashup. We've done that discussion before, and we've probably done a bunch. I'll just link that in the chat in case people want to check it out. We've probably done a bunch of that, those kind of discussions on the channel because to us it's a lot of fun at this juncture, right? The idea of envisioning, um, a D&D world that kind of progresses with the technology and expansion, in a similar way. Uh, or you could even do something like, what if you did Shadowrun's version of the goblinization, right? But it happened much sooner, right, as opposed to later. So like while people were exploring the West and people were settling, right? But now you have dwarves, trolls, elves, and in that time period. So like there's definitely different ways you can do it, and sometimes it's just fun to see like a different spin on things, on some of the things that have been familiar to us for a long time. Because personally, like the same thing over and over again, I totally get bored after a while, right? And I need to switch it up, and that's it's one of the reasons why we're playing Under the Dome, right? I was like, well, what would it look like if our D&D adventuring group was basically a motorcycle gang, which with some definite some inspiration from Descent to Avernus, going on there.
So I mean that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that game. It was quite sad when plans happened to come around that we couldn't get together last night and play that game. So, but
So,
it is what it is.
speaking of Firefly, right, style games and westerns, we've just played Vast Grim, where Vast Grim definitely has that kind of feel to it. Um, and especially in the sense there's more horror elements to it, obviously, but like you have space and yes, but everything is almost like wilderness and frontier in Vast Grim because
Mhm.
most of the galaxy has been kind of trashed with the war, against the Grim.
Mhm.
So it's kind of created a lot of that, including the Grim.
And
They're kind of similar to the Reavers.
mhm. Yeah, and space happened to be the next thing on my list, just because.
Yeah.
Let's face it, I was thinking about Firefly, so I kind of for this particular thing, I broke down space and science or science fiction as two separate genres, because you could definitely, like, I don't think science fiction fits in with Spelljammer. It's a space fantasy. Whereas, like, when you go into space science, that would be more like Star Trek. Um, and I feel science would be a lot harder to work in unless you started adding in another genre, whether you wanted to do, like, a science modern, or uh, more like a Frankenstein kind of element where, like, magic is created through science, and you start building all of these things, and it becomes very, very technical. And while, yes, we have artificers and there's some science aspects already in now our standard D&D, it's takes a little bit more work. And there's some DMs out there who are like, no, artificer's not in the core book, I don't use it.
Well, you could break it down to the science fiction and science fantasy, right? Like, your
Mm-hmm.
hard science fiction is Star Trek, right? Where they like go into explaining everything and they work out, like, in theory how everything would work. Or you have science fantasy more like Star Wars, which basically is actually more of an analog to westerns, and and also like the Magnificent Seven, and and samurai stories, instead of being driven by the science aspect of it. And also too,
Yeah, I mean,
like, I was just gonna say, also too,
that
like, you can do any kind of alternate history where you kind of like change the energy source, right? Whether it's steampunk or counterpunk, like any of the punks, right? Just completely changes everything and how it works. And all you have to do is keep moving that forward, right? Even, like when magic starts to become, industrialized, that completely changes everything. But it may also create different problems and have different solutions when you follow, those breadcrumbs out where they may lead.
and that's part of the fun of mashing, and the ability to add, change, remove, the aspects so that your game is unique, your world is different than everything else that's out there. um you know Dark Sun and Dune, both are desert like places, but to try and tell a story in either of those worlds are going to be vastly, different outcomes, because the rest of the setting is something different. So you when you start putting in, the different components, beyond, all right, well, we're looking at kind of a fantasy with both, a post-apocalyptic with both, but then, with Dune, I feel like they've added science into that as well, where Dark Sun just goes and turns the dial on fantasy to, like, low tech, because magic is not more readily available. Magic items are a lot harder to come by. It's more, they're both survivalistic worlds, but the seesaw, turns differently, or whatnot.
So, what's next on your list?
So if I pull up the next thing, you know, I kind of already, loosely mentioned, but modern, to play a D20 game, when you start looking at, you know, oh, well, I have access to technology, and I have access to, you know, TV screens and that kind of stuff. I mean, I dabbled with this with the Dungeons and Delving show, and added an entirely new skill set of technology that Robin's character was all about. And that's all it took. Like, I'm just like, well, we're going to add this in. And, you know, the confines of the game was set to, you know, a reality show complex. But if you were to open that up into the wider world, you would then be like, all right, well, we have access to different types of vehicles. So you'd have to, you know, vehicles land would not just be, oh, I know how to drive a horse and buggy, but no, I know how to drive a car. You'd have to add in vehicles air for those people who decide that they want to be pilots. And you can add or, add all these things that are separate components that are built on these foundational blocks that are out there. Vehicles, water is not just rowboats, but like, all right, I'm using jet skis and powered boats more so than I can steer a kayak.
So that's not even our wasn't even our first foray into adding kind of modern to D&D for Nerdarchy either.
No, we had the Nerdarchy Saves the World game,
which was when the modern rules were released for D&D. I think they were one of the Unearthed Arcanas. We incorporated those into a mini series that we played. That you can still find on the channel, which is was pretty interesting. We've played a version of Shadowrun on the channel, which it was we use Cipher System, but the setting of Shadowrun. And I feel like Shadowrun all by itself is just genre mash.
Sure, that's I don't know. That's I don't even know how you would classify that one because
fantasy and kind of
got
cyberpunk.
It's got a handful of things that are into it. It's technically somewhere between modern and future, but then it's got the cyberpunk elements to it. It's got some fantasy elements to it. So there's definitely some fun angles there, and we mashed not only genres but like rule sets as well, because we used some things from Cipher System and some things from Shadowrun. My character was just an absolute mess to try and keep his stuff all straight.
The fourth edition Gamma World, that used the fourth edition rule set for D&D, that in itself was nothing but a genre mash, right? The whole concept behind it was the what is it? The Hadron Collider gets fired up and it like merges all the different worlds together at once, right? So you have stuff from like a Conan and esque world and modern and sci-fi, all in the same the same place, right? Like in the same group even. It's pretty mashed up. So that game literally just takes genre mash and turns the dial to 11, and it's just totally ridiculous.
And I love the hell out of playing that game because my my character, who was a literal myconid that had a game store crash upon the caverns where they lived, and he was a fungoid regenerator. So like he turned into a cleric of Gary Gygax. It was pretty damn amusing. So we had kind of mentioned the post-apocalyptic, and kind of into that, I'm gonna add in, because it's a different type of apocalypse, pandemic. So how would you do a pandemic for your fantasy game?
Oh well, I guess you're just gonna lock yourself into your home and read a lot of novels because they didn't have Netflix. Like that's how you do it, right?
Well, I mean, like for an adventure, like would you want to run a game where either the people are trying to find a cure or like avoid the plague that's happening? It's kind of like the two options that you're running from. My wife and I have been watching Sweet Tooth, which has the sick as it's called, and it's destroyed a large percentage of the population. This, that, and the other thing. Um, and it's a lot of fun. But I'm like, what if there was a disease in a fantasy world that was so aggressive that it was able to wipe people out faster than clerics and paladins could go out there and cure disease, and people became isolationists and what have you. And it falls into the post-apocalypse because society breaks down when people are unable to communicate normally. And sometimes it happens because technology fails. Sometimes it happens, because a giant monster's out there. Sometimes it happens because medical reasons are just like, nope, you're all doomed. So I felt like that one is technically its own thing, but also falls into, post-apocalyptic or part of apocalyptic because it could still be happening.
So I would say, well, first of all, there's actually an RPG called Maximum Apocalypse,
Mm-hmm.
and it has got a ton of different apocalypses, right? Pandemic is probably just one of them. And I think if I was playing if I was playing if I was playing fantasy, like a fantasy style apocalypse, then I am going to want to probably make it interesting in the sense that, like, the plague, as you were calling it, is either turning people into zombies, devils, demons, or some other kind of monster, right? Like
Sure.
I've played with that a little bit in in the Scarlet Sisterhood, where you know instead of it being a disease, it was a drug, and the withdrawal symptom was you would um you would turn into um a troglodyte, because the drug was made from the troglodyte stench gland. So uh so by if they were going through withdrawal, then they start turning into monsters. And in the game, we had the stank tank for people that were basically turned into troglodytes, so until they could try and figure out a cure to try and try and turn them back, right? And so I would rather do something along those lines with a fantasy game. So and also it's like, okay, not only is it bad because people are dying from this disease, but also because some of those people are turning into monsters, creating even more problems.
And that's that's a fun element, and you could really take that in any kind of direction that you want. This allows you to mix and match the other things. Like, if you want a horror aspect, they could mutate into you know vast horrible things with a literal fear or terror ability that are like, yeah, you see this, you run for cover because you think this thing's going to eat you, and hey, maybe it wants to. And all semblance of who that person was could be gone, or maybe there's a sense of them inside, and maybe you want to try and save them, cure them. So the elements of exactly what that game is really depends upon what is the plague, what is the ramifications, what is the cure, like putting all of these kind of pieces together. Or if there is no cure, like what kind of survivalist game are you looking to play? So, like, again, how you put the puzzle pieces together, makes for what your game is and why it's unique.
Yeah. Also, we have a one shot of Maximum Apocalypse on the channel if you want to go and look for that. we're at the halfway mark, so this is where we harass you folks about uh, the sponsor, Easy Roller Dice, whether it's your first set of dice or your 1 millionth set of dice. But not only will we harass you, we'll point you to a promo code down in the description and that link, so you can use a one-time discount code, which is pretty sweet. Also, we have a Kickstarter we're launching Tuesday for Zoo Mafia. It's our own RPG. It's a hack of Powered by the Apocalypse. We also have live gameplays of that. We have two different playlists. Well, actually, 3 different playlists. 2 of them are completed, and one we just started last week, which is a lot of fun. So you can check that out. You can sign up to be notified. We're going to be giving away for a free set of dice, special dice, for our early backers if you back at a physical reward level where you get dice. So if that's something that would interest you, you should check that out and sign up and get the notification. Do you have anything, Ted?
I would just say, to further addendum onto that, with this particular thing, you have to select the early bird reward. You get the same thing with just the extra stuff, and that's only going to be there for the first 48 hours, after which that reward, that backer level will become unable to be added. So you'll have to, select the regular version. But if you've enjoyed us doing the Zoo Mafia stuff, definitely, hit that notify button and definitely, back it so that you can add that to your own rule set and help us add a new game out there for the rest of the world to play. Other than that, I'll give a shout out that, we are having session 2 of our next Zoo Mafia game is going to be Tuesday this week. We had a change that had to happen for last week, which is why we played on Monday. And we're going to have our next game of Old Guard this Friday, run by, Robin, who's absolutely awesome. And it's there's a giveaway, which there's a in the session 5, there is the rules for the giveaway are all in there, as well as the sign up sheet to get access to that. And you have now till the start of Friday's session to kind of figure out whether you want in on it or not, and then I'll contact the 2 winners and send out their prizes.
So Old Guard is a 5e D&D game, but the thing, speaking of the Zoo Mafia game, Blood Moonshine is actually a genre mashup of its own, right? Steven is running that on the channel for us, and it is standard Zoo Mafia combined with some horror and supernatural elements that we've been exploring, and I can't wait to see where that goes. It's a lot of fun. Avram, I do want to play Zoo Mafia though. Well, you can download the quick start rules over on the channel or over on the website for free, and you can start playing today. You don't have to wait for the Kickstarter. It's just after we finish the Kickstarter and put out the books, there's going to be a lot more to it.
Absolutely. So that's all I have. So with that, aspect of horror was the next thing, that I had on the list. And, whether you, combine that with modern and, you do a Call of Cthulhu or, Cthulhu style, thing, you can add in more investigative type, scenarios. So
I mean, I feel Cthulhu is almost its own genre by itself at this point, right? Like,
sure.
I've seen, like, first of all, I believe there's several different Cthulhu games where they take place at different time periods. Whether it's the 18th century, modern. There's also, what is it? Cthulhu Tech, which is like, I think you're in Mechs fighting Cthulhu like monsters.
Holy shit!
Yeah, so it's been all over the place. There was an anthology that I read was World War Cthulhu, and it was literally all these short stories with Cthulhu that happens during different periods of conflict. Everything from the Roman Empire up into the far-flung future. So
that's crazy.
You can mix Cthulhu with anything, but You
That
know,
is entirely true.
but that being said, horror was one of the early genre mashups for official D&D with Ravenloft and the Domains of Dread.
Indeed. So the next one I've got is a little bit harder to, fully bring into D&D, though we, in our history, technically have this kind of included, and it was almost an option uh, in my last game for D&D in a castle. But the group decided not to go through that crazy nonsense. So that's going to be Mecha. So I think having aspects of riding mechs around in D&D might push things beyond the boundaries of a normal game. But I think there's certainly ways, like, when you start looking at some of the stuff that Dave has done with the Under the Dome game, like, all right, we use our motorcycles usually to ride to and from things, but occasionally we have races or things that come up that entirely involve our bikes. You could do the same kind of thing, with a mecha and play I think the game was Master Blaster, back in the day, where like, you have some levels that you're walking around as a person, but sometimes like you got to get out of the vehicle and go explore the caverns and stuff. So like you could have
Well,
really two levels of adventure in
in
your D&D.
in third edition, I think it was Goodman Games that put out Dragon Mech, which was literally 3.5 D&D with mechs. Matter of fact, you probably still find those books, or at least the PDFs to those with those books.
I would imagine they're on drive through.
Yeah, for ideas. I'm kind of surprised you don't own them.
Well, I have so many third and 3.5 books that I honestly don't know. They're in several different places. It's possible that I have it, but
I mean, at this
it
point,
doesn't ring a bell.
there's not too many genres that haven't been mixed in RPGs. One of the games I've never played that I really would like to play is Deadlands, which is horror and western, right? So that's, to me, that seems like a lot of fun. I haven't gotten around to that. I've played western before, the old Boot Hill game, because back when we were kids, like we for like every week it seemed like someone would show up with a new game, and we would like make characters and maybe play like a session of it. So there was a time period where we were just playing pretty much everything before I started gaming with Ted and these guys.
Looking on drive through RPG, it looks like Dragon Mech was put out by Goodman Games, tagged with the Sword and Sorcery books, and like there wasn't just one book. I'm seeing at least 7 here. So it's definitely out there, and looks like 10, 15, 15, 11. So probably for $100 you could probably get the whole collection, and they all seem to be really well rated. um
Well,
so
Goodman
there's
Games
definitely some.
is a solid company, so
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
based on what I'm seeing here, and none of these covers look familiar, so I don't think these are things I ever picked up. But that's okay. I can't possibly own all the gaming books that are out there. I was a starving college student and post college student, for that all of that stuff.
So Avram, like BattleTech mechs in D&D, yes, just like that. I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain we did a video on that as well. So
I'm pretty sure we did, because it was probably, God, I can't, Rift, something about the Rift.
I
There was a movie that came out, and there was like several movies that were on it, where like the mech pilots would have to
Pacific Rim.
fight the monsters. Huh?
Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim, yes, thank you.
Yep, we definitely did Dungeons, Dragons, and Mechs. I'll throw the link in the chat for anyone that wants to check that out at their leisure. Feel free. You could just probably go to the Nerdarchy homepage and just put any random thing in the search, and we probably did a video on it. We should probably just retire while we're ahead.
We've said everything that's possibly out there. That's not true. It's sometimes funny. Like every time a new topic will come and be like, oh yeah, we've done that already. We've done something close. So the next thing I have, I don't feel really requires
hey Ted,
any real change. Yeah.
We literally did a Dragon Mech from Goodman Games, a D20 system game video, 7 years ago.
Okay.
That's back when we just had that's when we had the banner hanging behind us that Ted's mom made for us.
Those were the days, man.
Yeah.
Back when you could see all my untidy shelves that were over there.
No, you couldn't see them because we were hiding it behind the banner.
Wow, well, supposed post that.
Yeah.
So the next thing I have, I don't feel it requires much in the way of change, beyond more of a visual aspect and a story aspect, and that's anime.
What is this thing you speak of, Ted?
You know what anime is. You've watched a lot of it yourself. I am not in any way, shape, or form any kind of expert to get into anime. There's only a handful of things that I've watched and enjoyed, but I have a lot of friends that have spent hours and hours watching numerous shows, but anime tends to, and I don't want this to make it seem like I'm trying to offer any kind of slight, but to me, I feel anime is like everything is over the top, reactions to things and the plot lines and what have you. It's all, everything's dialed up to 11. There's your downtime is everything is super chill, and then it goes from instant downtime to, oh my god, the world's exploding and we must deal with this right now, and what have you. So like the rule set that D&D is, the characters are more powerful in the current edition than they were in previous editions. So I feel it's a scenario that you don't need to change the power. There's no rule set changes that really need to be done. But the way you run games and the way you tell your stories, if you want to take inspiration from anime, like that's where you would want to go. You'd want to be more aware. And I don't think I'm a confident enough GM at present to be like, oh yeah, I could do that without doing, research and getting enough things under my belt. Because I think the only anime I've watched, a lot of is Dragon Ball, and that's not enough to really sell the sizzle.
Yeah, there's only one genre that really comes to mind for me that I think would be really tough to match with D&D.
What's that?
I think Supers.
Supers is 2 down on my list, and Supers I feel would be a little tough, but I think there's an easier way to do it, and I feel like the rest of the world has to kind of cap at like 3rd to 5th level.
Yeah.
And you are 15th or higher. Your party is so far above, the normal populace that, they would look at you with awe, and like everybody is commoners. You've got some military and, whatnot that, oh, well, you can get to 3rd or 5th. But if you're not military, if you're not some well above the the norm person, that's it. You're just a nobody. But then you've got these people that step out there and be like, yes, I can of course teleport across town. Can't you? Oh no, I can't. But you're never going to mimic the full power of Supers. in a D&D game, because typically, like, all right, Gambit is never going to run out of being able to, polarize his cards. You know, Doctor Strange never runs out of his magic. He might get tired, but like, look at the movies. Yes, I just went through 14 million different realities to try and figure out, which was the way to go, and this is it. We got to do this. It's like, well, holy crap! How much magic do you really have? Well, you're the Sorcerer Supreme, so of course you do. Uh, but that is the way. If you wanted to run a supers inspired game, but play it with D&D rules, that's the way I do it. You'd have to separate the power level so drastically that you're epic, approaching epic level or epic level and beyond. To just be like, yep, I'm a badass.
Well, see, I don't really feel like it's just strictly power level that defines the genre of superheroes. Just because like you have street level heroes and stuff. And also, like a lot of people are kind of argue that 5e is like D&D with superheroes in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um but to me it still doesn't feel it doesn't have that same feel as a supers game.
All right, so do you feel it's not really possible, or do you feel
Oh,
it's
I'm sure it is. Limitless
it's
Adventure, they have a 5e rule set for supers. I have not checked it out. Uh, but they actually took 5e and did a couple of different rule sets for it of different genres. So if anyone wanted to check out and see how they do it, you definitely could. I just don't think 5e and the D&D system is good at duplicating superpowers in the genre, right? Other than like without just straight up everything using magic.
hmm.
So I think there's other systems that just do it much better
Sure.
and lend
And
themselves to it.
and while we always say, like, there are times that if you want to play a supers game, go play a supers rule set. But if you want to play D&D and you know play a different thing, a genre match, if you will, this is the conversation to have. This is where
Yeah.
we talk about the different things that are out there, and how we might do it, or who's already making rule sets for it. If you want to go look at the Goodman Games Dragon Mech and go figure out how to go fight dragons with mechs, sounds like an awesome plan. I'm excited. If you want to check out supers, look at Limitless Adventures.
Or maybe it's just retooling spells, right? And like everyone just kind of has them that they do at will, right? And like
Mhm.
because then you could do it, right? Like think about like if you wanted, a character that shoots eye beams, right? That could just be Scorching Ray, right? And they don't have a limit on how often they can do it. Or if you wanted to do Nightcrawler, that could just be Misty Step, or a character that just has the fly spell all the time, essentially. So I guess you could. I guess if I was going to do it, that's how I would, right? Like, um, maybe you assign a point system to the spells and the spell levels, and
Mhm.
you determine how powerful is this game you're playing, and you know if it's a PowerPoint. Probably you could probably look at the in the DMG they've got the um spell points instead of spell slots, right? And you can maybe like assign a number of spell points when you're creating your character, and you determine what level spell is your maximum, right? So like that's how many spell points. And if a fifth level spell is your maximum, well, you have enough to just be able to do that one spell. And because it's a supers game, you probably don't have the normal limitation on how often you can do it, right? That's just the power
Sure.
that you have. Depending what it is. Um, Or maybe you can break it up into a suite of abilities by going, oh, well, 5th level is the most powerful you have. That gives you X amount of points. Well, you can spend it on 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level spells, right? And kind of create your super that way. I guess if I was going to do it, that's how I would go about it. And then I wouldn't change the rest of D&D's per se. It's just that your heroes would have these extra abilities, and like you would determine is this, would you consider this like a street level hero? Would you consider this a global hero or a cosmic hero, right? That would determine how high the points went when you're designing the character. And then and obviously, right, like both DC and Marvel have definitely done things with their heroes where they've done different time periods of all of their heroes. So you kind of have like a blueprint there, what kind of stories you might want to tell, or how you might want to do things. But at the same time, if you have heroes, superheroes in your fantasy world, well, clearly and obviously you're going to have super villains, right? And you kind of give them the same kind of treatment.
And the villain that can always teleport away, just straight up teleport. It's like, man, he is so hard to pin down.
Well, I mean, yeah, like comics are just like that anyway. No one's ever dead until you see the body. And even then, they still might not really be dead.
So, so I've got the next one on my list. There's a rule set for everything, but I figured I'd throw this out there. This isn't so much a genre, but as an option, like a teens or kids scenario. And I know those things that are like, hero kids or, something along those lines, you know, intro to RPGs. It's always good to, be giving less things that are out there, like be it No Thank You Evil or what have you. Um, but you could still take the concept of a teen or a kids game and just play like a first level game. And all right, the kids got a little bit more training or knows how to get around, and you're playing it where your antagonists are along the same lines. Now there's kids on bikes and kids on brooms. There's a hero kids, No Thank You Evil. So there are these rule sets that are out there that you can already kind of go and do. And if you aren't sure how to like flavor your stories, you can look to those rule sets as to like what would you do if you aren't sure.
Yeah, well, like you said, there's kids on bikes, there's kids on brooms, and then like you could also look at stories like Goonies and Stand by Me, and there's probably
Mm-hmm.
like a bunch of others that came out during that time period. E.T., like all those kinds of things where kids are like doing stuff. Stranger Things is kind of a modern version for the kind of
Yep.
stories you might
Mm-hmm.
tell. Well, it's set in the
And
'80s, but
sure,
it's a modern production.
modern production. Like the game, I'm actually in a Kids on Bikes game over on Mini Terrain Domain. We've got our season finale this Thursday night. Um, and it's literally based on, not based on, but like inspired by Stranger Things, where like we're kind of stuck in this fictional town, and it is just weirdness happening every single episode. And like we literally have spoiler alert, if you aren't watching, but like one of the characters in the party, we've already met his future self, and we are in a haunted house where, while he did not watch, he was present for his own birth while his future self was handling the delivery. So if you can't get more effed up than that, like I don't know.
That sounds like a paradox just waiting to happen.
And yeah, I mean, the Jake is a great GM. Happy to be a part of it, but man, he is just sending us, in all kinds of crazy. Just what the hell are you doing, man? This is insane. And he's talking about dropping a big reveal, and it's already been like the last two episodes have been some pretty heavy lore drops, and I'm like, man, I don't know. Yeah. So if you're into it, you should definitely go check that out. The games are on Twitch. Just look up Mini Touring Domain, and if you want to watch them later, you can always catch the VOD on the YouTube channel.
Nice. It makes me think of Tales of Loop too. Is kind of fall with that kind of stuff as well.
And the last two, I feel very much fit within the confines of D&D, but mechanically, you certainly are going to make changes because how you run these style games. So first and foremost, I got pirates. This is pretty much like, all right, you're going to be on the ship for most of your game. And I recently, ran a game that was we live on a boat, and you know, you gotta take the boat away, man. You gotta steal their thunder, destroy their ship. That's kind of a fun thing to do. Um, but I feel it definitely fits, and you can dial up or down the technology meter as to whether or not you have access to pistols or cannons. Um, is black powder a thing? And if not, well, then it's like the ships have got to get on top of each other. Because other than that, you just have like ship mounted ballista.
Is pirates a genre? I mean, I feel like pirates fits with almost everything else.
Sure, but I mean, it's its own thing. Like you know, whether you're the pirate and you're doing raids on other ships, or like whether you're on a sailing vessel and you are frequently having to defend against. Uh, uh, I wish that we could get a modern version, but Pirates of Dark Water was an amazing show when I was younger. Uh, I don't remember a lot about it, but I know it
No,
was
there's only one
awesome
thing you
back
need.
then.
There's only one thing you need to remember: monkey birds. Monkey birds.
Monkey Birds.
So long as
Uh,
one or more pirates feature prominently, not a passing mention or a single incident involving pirates, the book can fall under pirate literature, but it can become more complicated than that. Pirate literature has a long history starting during the golden age of piracy itself, a genre. And
and I mean
you
that's
can
that
mix it
is
with
kind of
everything.
and that's kind of what One Piece is heavily about. Like, and the main character, he calls himself a pirate, but you know he's not a bad guy. So like usually you think pirates and pirates are the bad guys. So Luffy's kind of a an amusing dude. And then political games. This is like one where like, all right, this takes a definitely a skilled hand to run a political game because you're going to need to handle and memorize as a DM
So,
a lot of names. I feel
so couldn't you? What do you think about just encapsulating political under intrigue?
sure that would work for me. Intrigue works, but I feel like when you start getting into these things where it's more words and whatnot than combat that determines
Oh
the
yeah,
course
but there's a
of
Jane Austen RPG, right? And like
yeah, huh?
the goal is, I think like one of the main goals is getting a husband and like talking smack on other people, kind of, but like not really, like spreading
Sure.
gossip and rumors.
And
So it's like,
and that was like,
yeah,
so I put it down as political because I apologize. My brain is rather fried this weekend. as a the old fart that I am, I did a 5K yesterday morning in the 7 a.m. cold, and my body is not recovered. And even though my brain is not really required to do a lot of running, uh, it it definitely has not recovered. I'm dealing with a layer or two of exhaustion here. Um, but so I put down political, but yes, any of the more conversational focus games, intrigue and you know mystery that are out there, that it's all right, you're going to do more skill checks and role playing, and you're not going to be getting into, let's pull out the map and minis and bust out our combat, because that's not what those games are typically about. But you absolutely can pull those things in, and sometimes those dark alley dealings don't go well, and combat happens, and no game is going to handle that as simply as D&D if you're already using that rule set.
So it's going to be that time, folks. Quick reminder, down in the description you can find a link to the Zoo Mafia Kickstarter notification page. Remember, we're giving away a free set of dice for a new boss that we're launching with the Kickstarter, Bunny Malone. So if you want those, add those dice for free to your Zoo Mafia, you're going to want to jump in the first 48 hours. With that, we've got our game coming up Tuesday night at Zoo Mafia, the Blood Moonshine, as well as the Old Guard, which is a 5e D&D game coming up Friday. So you can check those out. You can find links in the description as well as on the channel. So until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.